still wake up some nights tasting the metallic tang of disinfectant. And something else. Something like old, dried blood. A phantom sensation clinging to the back of my throat. Blackridge Asylum wasn't just a job I'd stumbled into out of desperation. It felt more like a half-remembered penance, a sprawling, gothic bruise on the face of the Appalachians where society sent its worst nightmares, its most fractured minds to be forgotten. They gave me 3 rules on my first night, supposed cornerstones to integrate successfully, or so the coldly efficient Mrs. Crane had phrased it. Politely decline if a patient offers you the truth about why they're really here. Never, under any circumstances, work alone during the night shift. And if you start feeling unusually drowsy or disoriented, seek immediate medical attention from the on-call physician. Mark, the orderly whose vacant locker still bore his name, scrawled in faded marker, apparently got a little too curious about what one of them had to say. He's not curious about anything anymore, not according to the hushed, fearful whispers I'd already overheard. The asylum itself was a monument to faded grandeur and present decay. Gargoyles, eroded by acid rain and time, leered from the cornices. The windows were narrow, barred slits, like eyes squinting against a harsh, unwelcome light. Inside, the air was a palpable entity, a sickeningly sweet miasma of industrial cleaner, failing to mask the underlying notes of unwashed bodies, stale urine, and that faint, persistent metallic tang, almost like rust or old pennies. Echoes were a constant companion. My own footsteps on the worn linoleum sounded unnervingly loud in the vast, vaulted corridors, each click a reminder of my isolation. Mrs. Rebecca Crane, the administrative head, was as starched and unyielding as her pristine white uniform. She handed me a heavy ring of keys and a laminated map of the labyrinthine wards, her smile never quite reaching her cold, assessing eyes. Mr. Reese, your duties are straightforward. Hourly checks, medication reminders for those on the approved list, and ensure all ward doors remain secure. Dr. Klein expects punctuality and discretion. Her voice was clipped, devoid of warmth. It was Clara Devlin, the nurse assigned as my night shift partner, who pulled me aside later, as we stood in the flickering fluorescent hum of the deserted staff lounge. Her eyes, dark and intelligent, held a weariness that went beyond simple fatigue. The handbook they give you. It's for show, she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper, though the lounge was empty. The real rules are the ones that keep you breathing. Don't listen to their truths. It's a trap. Stick with me or another staffer. Always. And that drowsiness, it's not just tiredness, Malcolm. It's something else. You feel it. You find me. Or you hit the panic button. No questions. She didn't elaborate, but the grim set of her jaw told me more than any detailed explanation could. As I began my first rounds, a strange, unsettling familiarity prickled at the edges of my awareness. The curve of a particular corridor, the way the light fell through a grimy arched window, the specific pattern of cracked tiles outside Ward C. It all felt known, like a place I'd visited in a half-forgotten, deeply unpleasant dream. I shook it off as first-night nerves, the oppressive atmosphere playing tricks on my mind. But then, at the far end of a dimly lit, rarely used service corridor, I saw it, a heavy, steel-reinforced door, different from the others. It bore no number, no nameplate, just a stark, black-painted 0. It wasn't on my round sheet. It wasn't on the ward map Mrs. Crane had given me. And yet, I felt an almost gravitational pull towards it, a cold, insistent curiosity that whispered from the very stones of the asylum. The initial nights at Blackridge settled into a rhythm of unease. The silence between the hourly chimes of the grandfather clock in the main hall was a living thing, punctuated by sudden, unsettling eruptions, a choked sob from one locked room, a string of whispered obscenities from another, the rhythmic thud of A's head against a padded wall. I learned to identify the ambient sounds of misery. Naomi Bliss, the so-called nursery widow, would sit in her cell, rocking a porcelain doll with vacant painted eyes, her own gaze fixed on me with an intensity that felt like a physical touch. James Stitch Morrill, infamous for his grotesque artistry with human anatomy, would stand motionless at his cell door for hours, his eyes like chips of obsidian, following my every move. His silence was somehow more menacing than any overt threat. The first rule was tested on my third night. A man named Arthur Grimes, confined for reasons obscured by layers of redacted psychiatric jargon, caught my eye as I passed his cell. His face was gaunt, his eyes wide with a frantic, desperate lucidity that was profoundly disturbing in this place of managed madness. He pressed his face against the small barred window in his door. "Mr. Reese," he hissed, his voice a dry crackle. "Please, you look new. You might still listen. They'll tell you I'm delusional, but I know what really happens in this place. I know why they aren't who they say they are." His gaze darted nervously down the hall. "It's about room 0. It's about the ones who don't sleep." Clara's warning echoed in my mind, a cold counterpoint to the raw terror in Grimes' eyes. "I'm sorry, Mr. Grimes," I said, keeping my voice level polite. "I'm not permitted to discuss individual cases or unofficial narratives." The officialese felt like ash in my mouth. Grimes' face crumpled. A look of utter despair, so profound it was almost contagious, settled over him. The next morning his cell was empty, transferred to a specialized facility upstate. Mrs. Crane had said briskly when I'd inquired, her eyes not meeting mine. The coppery scent near his room was stronger than usual that day. Later that same shift, while doing paperwork in the sparsely furnished nurse's station, a wave of profound drowsiness washed over me. The fluorescent lights overhead seemed to dim, their buzzing deepening into a hypnotic thrum. My eyelids grew heavy, my thoughts sluggish, like wading through cold molasses. I remember my pen slipping from my fingers, the metallic clatter sounding miles away. I was sinking. Then, a sudden jarring crash from down the hall. Officer Gene Maddox, the night security guard, had apparently dropped a tray of something, startled me awake. My heart hammered. The disorientation was dizzying. As my vision cleared, I saw Stitch Morrill, standing silently outside his cell, watching me with that unnervingly placid, knowing gaze. It felt as if he'd been waiting for me to succumb. Clara, when I found her later, her face pale, shared a fragmented story. There was an orderly, David, young, thought he was tough. He started talking about the dream whispers, said one of the patients was feeding him truths in his sleep. Then the drowsiness hit him hard. Found him one morning in the day room just staring. Catatonic. He's still in a state facility somewhere, spoon-fed and vacant. She lowered her voice. That's the whisperer, Malcolm. That's what it does before it settles in. My unease solidified into a cold, hard knot of fear. Later, tidying a disused storage closet, I found a child's discarded drawing, crayon, on cheap paper. It depicted a stick figure that bore a crude, unsettling resemblance to my own lanky frame, trapped behind thick bars. Below it, in a shaky, childish scrawl, were 2 words: "Help me." And in the corner, a single black painted 0. The drawing felt like a targeted message from the asylum's unhinged soul. I tucked it away, a cold secret. The following week, the delicate balance of the night shift teetered. Clara called in sick, her voice over the phone a hoarse whisper. Mrs. Crane, with a pursed-lipped sigh, informed me I'd have to manage a wing alone until a replacement floater could be found, just for an hour or 2. The assurance rang hollow, the moment I was truly alone in the echoing expanse of a wing. The atmosphere shifted, became charged, the usual disparate sounds of the ward, the muttering, the weeping, the sudden shouts, seemed to coalesce to find a disturbing unspoken rhythm. Whispers, sibilant and furtive, erupted from multiple cells at once, too low to discern words, but creating a chilling conversational undercurrent. It felt like they knew I was alone. The sensation of being watched intensified, pressing in from all sides, the unseen eyes of the mad judging my every breath. I found myself jumping at shadows, my hand straying constantly to the heavy panic button on my belt. Dr. Elias Kleiner, the asylum's enigmatic chief psychiatrist, chose that night to make one of his infrequent, unnerving appearances on the ward. He moved with a quiet, almost spectral grace, his face an unreadable mask of professional calm. "Mr. Reese," he said, his voice soft, yet carrying an undeniable authority. "How are you acclimating to the unique pressures of Blackridge?" There was a faint, almost predatory curiosity in his cool gray eyes as he asked, a subtle emphasis on acclimating that made my skin crawl. He dismissed my hesitant, vague concerns about the ward's atmosphere with a benign, clinical smile and a comment about the power of suggestion in such an isolated environment. The disappearances continued, subtle but undeniable. A patient I'd seen shuffling in the dye room at dusk would be gone by my midnight rounds, their bed stripped bare, the air in their cell holding that lingering metallic tang and a chilling, unnatural coldness. "Routine transfer," Mrs. Crane would clip, her gaze fixed on a point just past my shoulder. "Specialized care required." The explanations felt increasingly threadbare. During one of my solitary patrols down the eerily silent D-wing, Naomi Bliss, the nursery widow, was pressed against her cell bars, her porcelain doll clutched tight. Her usual vacant stare was replaced by a look of sharp, lucid cunning. "The dolls remember what the doctors make you forget, new boy," she whispered, her voice like dry leaves skittering across concrete. "Some rooms aren't empty, they're just waiting for their face to be put back on." She tapped the doll's blank, smiling cheek. "The whisperer collects faces, you see. It likes them new, unlined." The words sent a fresh chill through me. Later, passing the Forbidden Room 0, I froze. A faint, almost inaudible scratching sound emanated from within. Desperate, persistent, like fingernails on unyielding steel. I found Officer Maddox down the hall, his usual stoic demeanor frayed at the edges. When I mentioned the sound, his face, normally impassive, went stark white. "Rats," he grunted, his voice too loud, too quick. "Big ones. Place is full of them." He wouldn't meet my eyes and practically fled towards the security office. But the sound hadn't been like rats. It had sounded heartbreakingly, terrifyingly human. The insidious drowsiness became a more frequent, unwelcome visitor. It would steal upon me unawares, blurring the edges of my perception, making the long nights feel like a disjointed, feverish dream. Time would stutter, skip. I'd find myself standing in a corridor with no clear memory of how I'd arrived. The previous minutes a hazy, erased slate. The metallic tang in the air, particularly in certain wings, seemed to coincide with these episodes, thicker, almost cloying. I started suspecting my prepackaged staff meals, the communal coffee pot in the break room. Once, I saw Stitch Morrell lingering near the coffee machine just before my shift started. A tiny, almost invisible glass vial, glinting briefly in his hand before he pocketed it. His movements precise and economical. He offered me a thin, chilling smile as I entered. Clara returned, looking drawn and pale, the shadows under her eyes darker than before. She confessed more, her voice trembling. "It was Michael, my old partner here," she said, twisting her hands in her lap. "He started getting those sleepy spells, said the walls were whispering to him, showing him things Dr. Klein was doing in the sub-basement labs. He said Klein was listening to the whisperer, trying to talk back. Then one morning, Michael just wasn't Michael anymore. Empty, like a puppet with the strings cut. Her fear was a cold, infectious thing. Desperate. For something, anything to ground me. I tried to access the asylum's older digital archives during a rare, quiet moment. I searched for information on Room Zero, on past unexplained patient deaths, on Dr. Klein's research protocols. Each attempt was a dead end. Access denied, file corrupted, records redacted by administrative order. Crane. I reviewed the security camera footage for the periods of my worst disorientation. The feeds for the relevant corridors were predictably filled with static, labeled technical malfunction. Footage unavailable. Mrs. Crane's efficiency extended, it seemed, to curating reality. One night, the drowsiness hit me harder than ever before. I slumped against a wall in a deserted hallway, the world dissolving into a thick, swirling fog. And then, a dream, or was it a memory, clawing its way to the surface. I saw myself, younger, terrified, strapped to a gurney. Dr. Klein's face, younger too, but with the same cold, assessing eyes, loomed over me. Needles glinted, and a voice, a chorus of voices, not Klein's, whispered from the very air around me. From inside my own head, promising truth, oblivion, release from some terrible, forgotten pain. You belong with us. You always have. I woke with a gasp, my heart pounding, sprawled on the cold linoleum. The corridor was empty, silent, but the dream, the memory, clung to me, vivid and terrifyingly real. Shaken, I found myself drawn back to Room Zero, an irresistible, morbid compulsion guiding my steps. Maddox was at the far end of the hall, distracted by a flickering light fixture. The door to Room Zero was, for the first time I'd seen, unlatched, open a mere fraction of an inch. My breath hitched. With trembling hands, I pushed it open just enough to peer inside. The cell was bare, a concrete box. In the far corner, huddled in the oppressive gloom, was a figure, gaunt, broken, wrapped in a threadbare blanket. As my eyes adjusted, a wave of vertiginous horror washed over me. The man's face, pale and etched with unspeakable suffering, was a distorted, nightmarish echo of my own. Older, ravaged, but undeniably me. He looked up, his eyes hollowed and filled with a terrifying, ancient weariness. Found mine. His lips moved, a dry, rustling whisper escaping. "You're not new," he rasped, his voice a ghost of my own. "You came back. They always make you come back." And then, a single, crystalline tear traced a path through the grime on his cheek. It once. A clear vessel this time. The face in Room Zero. My face, warped by time and unimaginable suffering, was a mirror reflecting a past I hadn't known existed, a future I now desperately needed to avoid. The man's whispered words, "They always make you come back," echoed the insidious pull I'd felt towards Blackridge, the unsettling familiarity of its shadowed corridors. It wasn't déjà vu. It was a horrifying, buried recurrence. My stomach churned with a nauseous blend of terror and dawning, fragmented comprehension. This wasn't just a job. It was a trap, meticulously reset. I stumbled back from the door, the rusted hinges groaning, the sound impossibly loud in the charged silence. Maddox, startled by the noise, spun around, his hand instinctively going to the heavy-grade taser on his belt. His eyes widened when he saw me, then darted to the slightly ajar door of Room Zero, a flicker of something akin to guilty terror crossing his usually stoic face. "Reese, What in God's name are you doing? He hissed, striding towards me. That room is off limits. Strictly. Dr. Klein's direct orders. But the dam of my fragmented memory had been breached. Who is he, Maddox? I demanded, my voice shaking but firm. Why does he look like me? What did Klein do to him? To me? Maddox flinched, his bravado wavering. He looked trapped. I don't know nothing about that, Reese. I just follow orders. Keep the doors locked. Don't ask questions. Before I could press further, Clara appeared at the end of the corridor, drawn by the commotion. She took in the scene. My pale face, Maddox's agitation, the forbidden door, and her own expression tightened with a grim understanding. She gently guided me away, back towards the relative sanity of the nurse's station. Maddox muttering about security breaches and unauthorized access. Cornered, and seeing the desperate, fractured look in my eyes, Clara finally let her carefully constructed walls crumble. The man in room 0. They call him the Echo, she whispered, her voice barely audible above the hum of the ancient HVAC system. He was one of Klein's earliest subjects, before the Whisperer became what it is now. Klein was trying to map its consciousness, to understand its structure. He used patients with specific trauma markers, like the Echo, like you, Malcolm, maybe. The pieces began to fall into place, jagged and horrifying. The drowsiness, the memory gaps, Stitch Morrow's silent ministrations with the coffee. It wasn't just about control. It was preparation. Klein wasn't studying the Whisperer. He was cultivating it, grooming potential hosts, refining its ability to merge, to erase, to become. The truth the patients offered, Rule 1, was often their fractured awareness of this insidious process, their minds struggling against the entity's invasive tendrils. The coordinated escape attempts, Rule 2, weren't escapes at all, but periods of heightened chaotic activity when the Whisperer pulsed strongest, its disembodied consciousness rippling through the susceptible inmates, testing its reach. Klein believes the Whisperer is the next stage of sentience, Clara continued, her eyes dark with a fear that mirrored my own. A collective mind born of concentrated trauma, capable of transcending individual limitations. He wants to be its shepherd, its interpreter, or God help us, its partner. She shuddered. Stitch Morrell. He's Klein's instrument. He administers the drugs, prepares their receptive minds. He's been dosing you, Malcolm. Small amounts, making you more open. The rage that surged through me was cold, sharp, and clarifying. This wasn't just about my lost past. It was about preventing a monstrous future. We have to get him out, I said, my voice low and determined, a stark contrast to the trembling in my hands. The man in room 0, he's the key. He knows. Clara looked horrified. Malcolm, no. That's what Klein wants. That room is... It's like the Whisperer's antechamber. Bringing him out now, with you so susceptible. But it was too late for caution. As if summoned by our conversation, a blood-curdling scream tore through the asylum, followed by a cacophony of shouts, bangs, and insane laughter from multiple wards simultaneously. The lights flickered violently, then plunged the corridor into a disorienting, strobing emergency red. The power system crackled to life, not with an announcement, but with a chorus of discordant, whispering voices, overlapping, insidious, speaking in tongues and fractured English, promising release, oblivion, union. The Whisperer was making its move. Jag kört bort igen. Maddox's panicked voice came over my walkie-talkie. Code black, multiple breaches. Stitch Morrell is... Oh God, he's got Thompson down. He's not moving like a man. The transmission ended in a choked gurgle and a sickening wet crunch. "He's using Stitch as a brute," I said, the grim realization settling, creating chaos to mask his real objective. "Malcolm, he's coming for you," Clara breathed, her eyes wide with terror. Then Naomi Bliss, the nursery widow, appeared at the end of the corridor, her porcelain doll held aloft like a strange, profane icon. The usual madness in her eyes was replaced by an eerie, unnerving lucidity. "The conductor calls the new song," she intoned, her voice a sing-song chant. "The empty vessel awaits the face. Room 0 holds the forgotten note, the one that breaks the melody." She pointed a long, pale finger towards the forbidden room. Ignoring Clara's desperate plea, I ran towards room 0. Stitch Morrow, his movements unnaturally fluid and powerful, his eyes glowing with that same faint internal luminescence I'd seen in my nightmare of Klein, materialized from a side corridor, blocking my path. A scalpel glinted in his hand, held with surgical precision. "Dr. Klein has been expecting you to fully awaken, Mr. Reese," Stitch said, his voice a sibilant hiss, overlaid with those same chorus whispers. "The Master is eager to complete the transference." The fight was brutal, desperate. Stitch was inhumanly strong, his mind clearly not entirely his own, driven by the Whisperer's will. I used my heavy maglite, the asylum's own oppressive architecture. Anything I could to fend him off. Clara, overcoming her fear, joined the fray, using a heavy medical chart like a shield, creating a vital distraction. During a lull, I managed to break past Stitch, reaching room 0. I threw open the door. The man who was my echo was huddled in the corner, rocking back and forth, whispering, "It's here." The voice, It wants the empty spaces." "I know," I said, my voice surprisingly calm. "But it needs a whole mind, doesn't it? Not a broken one, and not one that remembers." As Stitch lunged again, a new voice cut through the chaos, cold, precise, and utterly devoid of human warmth. "Excellent, Mr. Reese. You display a remarkable resilience. A most promising candidate." Dr. Elias Cleaner stood at the entrance to the corridor, flanked by 2 hulking orderlies whose eyes held the same vacant, luminous quality as Stitch's. Klein himself was impeccably dressed, a small, almost serene smile on his lips, but his eyes pulsed with that faint internal light, stronger now, more pronounced. It was clear he was no longer just Elias Klein. The Whisperer has grown beyond these crude walls, beyond these broken minds. Klein continued, his voice now a disturbing blend of his own precise baritone and the sibilant chorus of the entity. "It requires a new paradigm, a willing, intelligent host to bridge the gap. You, Malcolm, with your particular resonance, your pre-existing pathways, you were always the prime candidate. Your previous stay here was merely groundwork." He gestured, and the 2 orderlies advanced. The lights flickered wildly, the whispers intensifying, swirling around me like a physical vortex. The very walls of the asylum seemed to pulse, to breathe with the entity's presence. I could feel it pressing against my mind, searching for entry, promising an end to the pain of my fragmented past, offering a new, terrible wholeness. The man from room 0 began to scream, a thin, reedy sound that was swallowed by the rising tide of the Whisperer's voice. This was it, the unveiling, the moment the asylum gave up its deepest, most monstrous secret, and I was at its heart. The moment stretched, taut and vibrating with an unnatural energy. Klein, or the Klein Whisperer hybrid, watched me with an expression of serene, predatory anticipation. The 2 orderlies, their movements jerky and puppet-like, advanced, their eyes glowing with that sickly, internal luminescence. The chorus of whispers was a deafening vortex now, clawing at the edges of my sanity, promising Oblivion, promising union. I could feel my own thoughts beginning to fray, to dissolve into the overwhelming psychic static. Fight it, Malcolm. Clara's voice, raw and desperate, cut through the noise. She had managed to incapacitate Stitch Morel momentarily, a heavy fire extinguisher lying near his prone form. Now she stood defiantly between me and Klein's advancing puppets. The man from room 0, my broken echo, suddenly lurched forward, his eyes wide with a desperate final lucidity. "No more," he shrieked, his voice surprisingly strong. It takes the gaps. Fill the gaps. Remember!" He lunged, not at me, but at one of the advancing orderlies. A desperate, sacrificial act. The orderly, taken by surprise, stumbled, his glowing eyes flickering with confusion. His words, remember, pierced through the fog in my mind. The dream, the memory of Klein, the needles, the initial trauma that had brought me to Blackridge. It surged back, not as a nightmare, but as a shield. The pain of it, the raw, undiluted horror of my original breakdown, the event that had fractured my mind and made me receptive. It was a terrible memory, but it was mine. As the second orderly reached for me, I met his luminous gaze, not with fear, but with the full, remembered weight of my own past torment. "You want a mind?" I snarled, the words tearing from my throat. "Then take one that knows what you are." Something shifted. The orderly recoiled as if struck, his light dimming for a crucial second. The whisperer, it seemed, preferred unblemished, unknowing vessels, or minds it could easily hollow out and reshape. Direct confrontation with a fully aware and resistant trauma was unpalatable. Klein's serene expression faltered, a flicker of something akin to surprise, or perhaps annoyance, crossing his features. Intriguing. More complex integration than anticipated. Naomi Bliss, who had been watching from the shadows, her porcelain doll held high, began to chant, a strange, atonal melody that seemed to counter the rhythm of the whisperer. The broken doll sings its own song. The cracks let out the old light, not just in the new. The face remembers its first name. Her words were nonsense, yet they seemed to disrupt the psychic assault, creating tiny fissures in the whisperer's overwhelming presence. Seizing the momentary confusion, I grabbed the heavy fire extinguisher Stitch had dropped. With a desperate roar, I brought it down on the control panel for the wing security shutters and emergency power override, a panel Klein himself had been standing near. Sparks flew, alarms blared, a different, more conventional kind of alarm. The emergency red lights died, plunging the immediate area into near-total darkness, broken only by the chaotic strobing of a few failing backup units. The effect on the whisperer, or at least its hold on Klein and the orderlies, was immediate. The luminous glow in their eyes flickered violently, then dimmed significantly. The chorus of whispers faltered, became disjointed, as if its primary amplification source had been damaged. Klein cried out, a sound that was purely human, a sound of pain and sudden disorienting loss. The lights? The system? It needs the network, Clara gasped, understanding dawning. The asylum's archaic electrical system, its very infrastructure, was somehow intertwined with the Whisperer's ability to manifest and control. In the ensuing chaos, with alarms blaring and the remaining loyal, or simply terrified, staff beginning to respond to the code black, the immediate threat began to fracture. The two orderlies, now disoriented and moaning, were no longer in immediate danger. The man from room 0, having bought us precious seconds, had collapsed, his breathing shallow, but a flicker of peace on his ravaged face. Klein, clutching his head, his face contorted, was vulnerable. Before he could recover, before the Whisperer could reassert its full control through him, I acted. There was no grand battle, No dramatic exorcism, just the brutal, desperate reality of survival. I used the fire extinguisher again. The immediate aftermath was a deafening silence, broken only by the distant wailing alarms and our own ragged breaths. Klein lay unconscious, perhaps worse. The pervasive, oppressive psychic pressure had lifted, leaving behind a hollow, ringing void. The Whisperer wasn't gone, I knew. It was too ancient, too deeply embedded in the very stones of Blackridge, but its primary conduit, its chosen shepherd, was broken. For now. Mrs. Crane, her starched uniform disheveled, her face a mask of horrified disbelief, was found cowering in her office, the carefully constructed facade of control shattered. The few remaining security staff, led by a shaken but resolute senior officer who arrived with the first wave of external response, began the slow, nightmarish process of restoring order. Cell by agonizing cell, the asylum was in lockdown. The covenant, whatever unholy bargain Klein had made with the entity in the asylum's heart, was, for this moment, broken. The official story, when it finally emerged from the chaotic tangle of investigations and sealed testimonies, was a masterpiece of bureaucratic obfuscation. Dr. Elias Kleiner, a brilliant but dangerously unorthodox psychiatrist, had suffered a catastrophic psychotic break, fueled by illegal, unsanctioned experiments on vulnerable patients, resulting in a localized riot and tragic loss of life, including in a localized riot and tragic loss of life. Several staff members and patients deemed unstable. Blackridge Asylum was deemed structurally and psychologically compromised and was permanently closed. Its remaining inmates transferred to other, presumably more secure, facilities. No mention of luminous eyes, collective consciousness, or voices that whispered from the walls. My own fragmented memories, particularly those preceding my re-employment, were pieced back together with agonizing slowness, aided by Clara's hesitant corroborations and a few heavily redacted medical files we managed to glimpse before they were permanently archived. I had indeed been a patient years ago. A severe dissociative episode following profound personal tragedy had made me a prime candidate for Klein's early, quieter experiments with whatever nascent form the Whisperer had then possessed. I hadn't been cured. I'd been prime. My return wasn't an accident. It was a recall. The man in room 0, the Echo, had been a failed earlier attempt. His mind too fractured to serve as a stable host, left as a living, tormented relic. His final act of desperate lucidity had perhaps saved me by forcing me to confront and integrate my own buried pain, making me a less hollow vessel. Clara and I went our separate ways. The shared horror was too much to build a future on. A constant, unspoken shadow. She moved to the coast, she said in a brief, stilted postcard a year later, needing the vastness of the ocean to counteract the crushing claustrophobia Blackridge memory. She didn't mention if she still heard whispers on the wind. I tried to find anonymity in the sprawling indifference of a city far from the brooding Appalachians. I found a quiet, solitary job in a library archive, surrounded by the hushed rustle of paper and the scent of old bindings. For a while, there was a fragile peace. The nightmares still came, of course. Corridors that twisted into impossible geometries, faces that glowed with an unholy light, and the constant sibilant murmur just beneath the threshold of hearing. But they were only nightmares. Until one evening, cataloging a newly acquired collection of pre-war psychiatric journals, my hand froze. One volume, bound in faded black leather, bore the crest of a private sanatorium in rural New England, an institution that had been closed for decades due to alleged patient mistreatment and unethical research practices. A footnote in an article on experimental group therapies mentioned the sanatorium's director. a Dr. Alistair Kale, who had theorized about a resonant psychic field generated by concentrated human trauma. A field that could, he believed, achieve a rudimentary collective sentience. Kale had vanished without a trace shortly before the sanatorium was shut down. That night, as I sat alone in my small apartment, the silence which I usually craved felt different. It felt receptive. It felt receptive. I closed my eyes, and for a fleeting, terrifying moment, I wasn't in my apartment. I was standing in a long, dark corridor, remarkably similar to those at Blackridge. At the far end, a single door, marked only with a freshly painted, stark black 0. And from behind it, I heard a faint, familiar scratching. I opened my eyes, my heart hammering. It was just a room, just silence. But as I looked at my reflection in the dark window pane, I thought I saw, for the briefest, almost imperceptible instant, a faint, internal luminescence flicker deep within my own eyes before it was gone. A soft, sibilant whisper, so faint it could have been the draft under the door or the settling of the old building, seemed to breathe a single possessive word into the quiet. Soon, the whispers hadn't stopped. They had merely learned to be more patient. And Blackridge was not the only house built on a foundation of sorrow.